You want to hear something exciting? You just learned an important concept of React Native and something that most React Native developers don't know, and that is what it actually does. You see, if we go to the React Native repo here by Facebook, because remember, React Native was created at Facebook, if we scroll down, we see what language or languages it uses. So over here, we see that it's mainly written in JavaScript. That makes sense. But there's also Java, Objective-C, C++. Why is that? You should be able to answer that question now, right? Because React Native, not only is it just JavaScript code, but it is also that bridge that allows us to communicate with the native platform. And the way we communicate with the Android platform is through Java. The way we communicate with the iOS platform is using things like Objective-C and C++. And now we're also able to uncover some interesting things about React Native and actually understand why they are the way they are. For example, if I go to the JavaScript environment section on our React Native docs, we can actually understand this. It's going to say, when using React Native, you're going to be running your JavaScript code in two environments. Okay. In most cases, React Native will use JavaScript Core, the JavaScript engine that powers Safari. We just learned that. That's great. Now, when using Chrome debugging, which we're going to do throughout the course, that is when we test our app on our computer instead of our phones, we're going to be using the JavaScript code on Chrome. So Chrome uses the V8 engine instead of JavaScript Core. So when we test our code on our browser, instead of using JavaScript Core, it's going to test using the V8 engine to understand JavaScript. So this way we don't have to ship the JavaScript Core while testing our app. Everything is really, really fast because our browsers already have this. Now the beauty is that because all our React Native apps have this JavaScript runtime or environment, it also gives us some niceties like the Babel JavaScript compiler. So this way we can use all the new JavaScript features because our code is compiled through this so that we can use arrow functions, we can use object spread, we can use things like JSX for React, and so on and so forth. But there's also some exciting things now. For example, when you go to using Hermes, this is a new feature that just came out of Facebook. Facebook was having issues with this idea that the JS core that we were running with every single React Native application was really, really slow on Android. So they came up with an open source JavaScript engine optimized for running React Native apps on Android. And this is an interesting thing. So Hermes is a new way for you to, instead of using the JavaScript core, to ship Hermes, which is optimized and faster for Android. And this was a common problem with React Native. Usually, apps on Android were slower than the apps on iOS. And that was because iOS naturally already comes with the JavaScript core. Remember, JavaScript's core is used for Safari. Safari is a browser by Apple. And they include JavaScript core on all the iOS apps. Android, on the other hand, doesn't have that. So we saved a bit of space with iOS apps because they didn't need to include the JS core with React Native because it was already on the phone, versus Android that doesn't have the JS core on the phone and instead had to ship it all together with our JavaScript logic. So Hermes was created to say, hey, don't use JavaScript core because it's bloated, it's heavy, it's not as performant. Instead, use Hermes, a new JavaScript engine that is optimized for Android. How cool is that? Now, I know we geeked out a bit about the internals, but I hope things are starting to make sense. And this is kind of fun now because when we write code now, we understand how things are working underneath the hood, how React Native is able to have native-like performance, but also use JavaScript to communicate with these phones that historically only like to be coded in a certain language. We have some fun times ahead, so let's get into it.